Hey everyone, I am Pine and welcome to Mathamancy, the show where we talk about numbers. Let's talk about the Crystaline Shiv. The Crystaline Shiv is an item in Strife which grants bonus power and mana regeneration based on how full your health bar is, up to 16 bonus power and 1.45 mana per second. The question with the Crystaline Shiv is, at which health level is it actually worth its costs? So, if we use the default version, the item costs, so the default components and no enchantment, the item costs 2055 gold. But how full does our health bar has to be to give us enough stats from the Crystaline Shiv to make it worth those 2055 gold? If we want to value stats an item gives in Strife, we always have to compare to something else. I usually compare to basic components and starting items. The reason for that is that basic components are the least gold efficient way of obtaining a basic stat in Strife, while starting items are the most gold efficient way of obtaining a stat in Strife, or a basic stat. So comparing other items towards those two gives us a range, or two borders with the range in between, when gives us an idea how gold efficient an item actually is in a certain situation. Okay, let's take a look at this graph, shall we? At the x-axis, we have the health percentage. So how full is our health bar? Half full, completely full, you're dead. At the y-axis, we have gold values. The yellow line is 2055 gold. So this is the amount the Crystaline Shiv costs all the time, obviously, because that amount doesn't change based on your health bar. Okay, let's talk about the other two lines. The blue line is how much gold you have to pay if you want to buy all the stats the Crystaline Shiv gives at a certain health level, if you want to buy all those stats with only basic components. The red line is how much gold you have to pay if you want to buy all the stats the Crystaline Shiv gives on a certain health level with starting items. So this means if we would take all the stats we get from Crystaline Shiv at full health and would buy all those stats with basic components, we pay around 3,100 gold. If we would buy them with starting items, which are more gold efficient than basic components, we would pay around 2,200 gold. If we would be at half health and calculate the stats we get from Crystaline Shiv and would buy those with basic components, we would pay around 2,200 gold. If we would buy them with starting items, we would pay around 1,600 gold. What does this tell us, though? We have to take a look at those 2 points. This point, around 42%, the blue line crosses the yellow line. This means at 42% of health, the Crystaline Shiv is as gold efficient as basic components. So not very gold efficient, because basic components, as I said earlier, are the least gold efficient way, or one of the least gold efficient ways in Strife of obtaining a stat. So if our health bar is less than 42% health, the Crystaline Shiv is actually trash and is not very gold efficient. The other point, around 92%, the Crystaline Shiv gets as efficient as starting items, so very efficient. So if our health bar is almost full, the Crystaline Shiv is a very, very gold efficient way of getting those stats, power and mana regeneration. The truth lies somewhere between those two numbers. So as I said, we have to compare to other stuff. So we compare it to basic components and we compare it to starting items. What does this tell us, though? This means that when we are at around 50% or less health, the Crystaline Shiv is actually a pretty bad item. So if you can guarantee that your health bar will be above 70% most of the time, then Crystaline Shiv is probably a good pickup if you need mana regeneration and power, obviously. But if you cannot guarantee that, then you're probably better off buying a different item. Okay, so this was the too long didn't watched version of this video. Let's go a little bit more into detail. Oh, now before we do that, you could ask, what if I craft the Crystaline Shiv differently with different components, for example? Well, different components don't change much because we compare the item to component anyway. So this doesn't change anything. Enchantments, however, can change something. Let's talk about the Wit enchantment mainly because the other two are a bit hard to calculate. The Wit enchantment gives us an up to 4 more extra power. Basically, the Wit enchantment increases the buff of the recipe. It gives up to 4 bonus power and up to 0.36 mana per second based on your health bar again for another 235 gold. So I did the math and the result was basically the same. It didn't change the graph at all, basically. It's actually quite the same. So this means this graph is true for basically all Crystaline Shivs. But it would look a bit different for the Perfection enchantment, I guess, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, as I said, let's talk a bit more about details and how I actually calculated or how I actually created this graph. So this looks a bit overwhelming because there are a lot of numbers, but it's actually quite simple. Let me explain it to you. So what we have up here is the amount of gold we have to pay per point mana per point mana per. This is the amount of gold we have to pay per point mana regeneration if we would buy with basic components. I calculated this by dividing the amount of gold the clarity shard costs by the amount of mana regeneration it gives. So 1 point of mana regeneration is worth 362.5 gold if we would buy it with basic components. I did the same with starting items, so the amount the glacial gem costs, 740 gold, divided by the amount of mana regeneration it gives, and we get 255 gold per point. We do the same for power shard, and fellblade, and we get 75 and 35.6. Okay, let's talk about the Crystalline Shiv though. What do we have here? In the most left column, we have our health percentage. So full health, dead. Then we have how much power we get from the default components. So 2 power shards give us 12 power. This is not based on our health, so it's always 12. Then we have the same for mana regeneration. The clarity shard gives us 1.2 mana per second. Then we get the next 2 columns tell us how much power and mana regeneration we actually get from the recipe. So the max value for power is 16. So we multiply 16 with the health percentage. And so at full health we get 16 power, at half health we get 8 power. The same for mana regeneration. And at 0 health we get 0 power, obviously. Same for mana regeneration. The maximum value is 1.45, so we multiply it with the health percentage, and we get those values. Then we add up those values. So this is component power plus buff power, and this is component magic resistance, magic mana regeneration, not magic resistance, sorry, plus buff mana regeneration, and we get those numbers. So these are the total numbers the Crystaline Shiv gives us on a certain health level. So at full health we get 28 power and 2.65 mana per second. Now we calculate how much we would have to pay if we would buy those stats with basic components or with starting items. So for basic components we multiply the 28 power, or this column, depending on the health level. At full health level, it's 28 power, with the amount we have to pay per point of power if we buy it with basic components, 75, and add the amount of mana regeneration we get, 2.65, multiplied with the amount of gold we have to pay per point mana regeneration, 362.5. And we get 3061 for full health, and for example 2198 for half health. We do the same with the starting item values, and we get a bit lower numbers, obviously, because starting items are more gold efficient. And yeah, this is actually how the graph created. And you can see the points, like as I said, at at 42% and 92% we have the lines cross. And you can see this here as well. At around somewhere between 40 and 50% lies the 2055 mark, pretty close to 40%, and pretty close to 90%. So it's probably more 91 than 92 actually. Lies the 2055 mark for the starting items. So yeah, this is how the graph got created, and I hope you understood what I was trying to explain to you. If not, feel free to ask in the comments below. I'm happy to answer all your questions. And I hope you learned something. And thanks a lot for watching. Have fun and see you next time when we talk about a bunch of numbers. Or just play Strife. We will see.